This isn't just about history books. It's about how erasing women's past contributes to our present.
And if we don't start telling these stories loudly and often, the next generation is going to grow up thinking women just didn't do much and then therefore shouldn't do much.
Right.
Welcome to the Scaries, brought to you by Erasure Co. I'm Sky.
And I'm Matilda. We are proudly broadcasting from Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. In each episode, we tackle the alarming, inconceivable, questionable, shocking, and scary statistics relating to, impacting, and intervening with the lives of women and girls worldwide.
You'll hear the scary truth, take away tools and tips, and learn about what you can do about it. And the Scaries is an opportunity to raise awareness, share resources, and use our voices as women and supporters of women to make real change. As always, we like to note that the views expressed here are solely our own opinions, and this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. So please do listen with caution, as some content could be triggering to you.
As straight, cisgender, white, able-bodied settler women, we are aware of the privilege that we have, and we want to use this platform to spread awareness about the scary reality that women from around the world face in different life situations.
And why?
Because sometimes nothing is scarier than being a woman. Welcome back to the Scaries. Today's episode is called The Forgotten Women of History Where's Their Movie? And why? Well, because we just wrapped up the awards season, which is one of my most favorite seasons of the year. And that got us thinking, why do we have 3 separate biopics about Steve Jobs, but not one major motion picture about the women who invented Wi-Fi, GPS, or even Monopoly?
Right. Like, do you even know? I don't. Like, there's so many things that that are women made and women invented.
Right.
And I bet you, and I have a list here, and I bet you didn't know half of these.
Okay.
So Bluetooth came from a woman. Windshield wipers came from a woman.
Vital.
Telecommunications came from a woman.
So like we wouldn't be here right now.
Treatments for malaria came from a woman.
Incredible.
Space station power came from a woman. Paper bags came from a woman. Computers. Really?
So again,
yeah, like that was missed
here.
in all these Apple and
right, like you're welcome,
Bill
Steve.
Gates movies and whatever. And honestly, you came from a woman. We all know where we came from, but like let's not forget that, because we wouldn't be here.
The most important,
these amazing women in our lives. So
absolutely,
the bottom line is, so many things we rely on and would have never have known based on history were taught or were not taught because of this erasure of women.
Totally.
And it's so sad. So today we're diving into why women's contributions to history have been erased, why we still have to fight for representation, and why Hollywood keeps making more movies instead of biopics about actual female geniuses. Because look, if I have to sit through one more movie about tortured white male geniuses, I'm going to start throwing feminist history textbooks at the screen.
Right, they're going to get them. They're going to get them.
Seriously. So why are we bringing this up now? Well, like Talita said, March isn't just about trying to convince yourself that winter is over, even though it's absolutely not.
No, it's snowed today.
This damn winter. But it's about Women's History Month, and most recently International Women's Day on March 8th. So this means 2 things. First, if they haven't actually quite quietly removed these celebrations from their calendars, then many corporations have dropped their one day of girl power marketing before promptly returning to underpaying women and failing to promote them.
Right.
And second, we're about to get mad about history, and we're bringing receipts.
Heck yeah, we are. It is my favorite time of the year. We always call it the Super Bowl because it's bigger and better and more important than that anyways.
Seriously.
But
way more important.
Exactly.
But it's a big time for us.
It's
and
huge.
For all women.
Yes, exactly. I mean, and it shouldn't just be one day or one month. We do this every single day of every year, but nothing like a good old corporate hypocrisy moment to remind me that capitalism will co-opt literally anything for profit.
Right? Honestly, we've got multi-billion-dollar companies that won't even give women paid maternity leave. And they're out here selling empower women t-shirts made at the sweatshops that underpay women.
It's actually very gross. And the CEOs are probably posting an inspirational, quote unquote, on LinkedIn that they definitely didn't read the first sentence of. Like, here at insert corporation name, we believe in uplifting women. Oh, really, Brad? Then why does your C-suite look like a big old boys hockey team?
Oh, so true.
Yeah.
Or like the companies that change their logos to pink or purple for 24 hours
Oh, God,
while
exactly.
actively literally facing gender discrimination lawsuits.
It's
wild. And let's not forget the restaurants and the bars that decide Women's History Month is really just about discounted pink drinks, Cosmos, you name it. We're giving me a rosé for the ladies special. A thank you. That really makes up for the gender pay gap and the fact that my retirement savings will be smaller because I took time off to have kids.
right. Like, I like the discounted rosé.
I mean, I'll
but
take it. But
let's also do other things.
yes,
in
that's
addition
not
to
really the goal here.
No, and that's not the only thing that's going to make it better. But
All
okay,
yours.
let's actually talk about what's going on here. So because while brands are out here pretending that they care about women, we're still literally missing from history. Here's a few facts here for you. Only 19% of biographies on Wikipedia are about women. Less than 8% of statues in major cities worldwide depict women. I mean, let's not even get started on like statues just
half the statues are problematic.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like that's maybe just
statues were a thing.
Yes.
Statues shouldn't have been a thing.
Yes, exactly. And lastly, as women are mentioned in history books just 13% of the time. Yeah.
So even in 2025, when we have unlimited access to information and a tiny computer in our hands at all times,
right,
we are still playing catch up on making women visible in history.
And that's not by accident. That is centuries of deliberate erasure and people deciding that women's contributions didn't matter enough to write down.
Right, because history wasn't written by a woman or for women.
Mm-mm.
It was written by the dudes who wanted to be remembered.
Yep.
Yeah.
Point
Which
blank.
is exactly why we get a million movies about men making their war strategies, but not one major Hollywood film about the women who built modern computing, like I mentioned before. And honestly, like, let's remember who dominates the film industry in the first place.
Right.
It's men.
Right, exactly. And that's really because apparently if a man invents a bomb, he gets a 3-hour epic about his inner turmoil.
Ugh.
But if a woman discovers literal DNA or space travel, she gets a 2-paragraph mention in a textbook if she's lucky.
And let's talk about how history is taught, because even when we do get women's stories, they're like, and then Susan B. Anthony fought for women's right to vote. The end. Like, that's all we get.
Yeah, and we're supposed to just ignore the fact that she didn't even support voting rights for Black or Indigenous women. Like, there's just a whole thing.
Let's continue. Like, the way women's history is sanitized and watered down is a whole other level of erasure. And honestly, if I had $1 for every time a textbook focused on war and completely ignored the woman literally running the country while the men were off fighting, I don't think I've ever heard that book. I'd be rich enough to fund my own feminist film studio, which I should.
You really should. And that is exactly what we're talking about today. Because this isn't just about history books. It's about how erasing women's pasts contributes to our present.
And if we don't start telling these stories loudly and often, the next generation is going to grow up thinking women just didn't do much and then therefore shouldn't do much.
Right. And that is not an option.
No.
So the problem isn't that women's stories have been erased. It's that for centuries, historians didn't even bother to write them down at all. Like, imagine living in a time when a woman literally invented a life-changing technology and some old historian was like, let's write about a guy's horse battle instead.
Exactly. Like, listen, Kevin, I promise you we have enough war stories. If I have to hear another war story, I tell you, who cares? Like, what's a one war? What's another?
Yeah, they're all the same. Yeah. But according to the position of women in history, historians and archaeologists assumed that the most important stories were about war, politics, and industry, all things that traditionally centered around men, which means women's contributions in science and education and activism even were dismissed as domestic or irrelevant. Because, discovering DNA again, or programming the first computers and leading civil rights movements is apparently just household busy work.
Just doesn't add to anything or advance us forward at all.
No.
Because obviously making bread was the only thing women did for the last 5,000 years. This whole thing reminds me of how for centuries, medical science actually thought that women's hysteria was caused by their uterus just casually wandering around their body. Oh no, Margaret's uterus has migrated again. Quick, bring out the smelling salts and tell her to go sit quietly. Like, what?
Like,
How do we listen to these quacks?
Oh god, and the solution for hysteria was for them to have an orgasm. It's
Oh
did
yeah,
you know
I
that?
saw
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
It's a very
so
good
girls
thing.
would be like, "Oh yeah, bring
Yeah.
it on."
Yeah, they were like,
hysteria
okay,
all day
sure.
long.
Yeah. But these were the same men deciding what counted as quote unquote real history.
Yep, and this isn't just a historical problem; it's still happening.
Yep.
Because guess what? Even in modern media, women are still being erased. The Alpha Portrayals Report from 2023 found that 83% of discriminatory behavior in media is by men toward women, and men dominate 75% of screen time in nearly all expert roles in media, like I kind of mentioned before. So when we say women's history has been erased, we don't just mean history books left them out. Like, people are intentionally leaving them out. Men are intentionally leaving them out. We mean they weren't even given the script in the first place.
So this is where things get interesting, because when people actually look for women's stories, they find thousands. In 2023, British novelist Kate Moss decided to test this. And sorry, this is not like
I was going to say
the
Kate Moss.
The Kate Moss. It's Mosse. She launched a social media campaign called #WomenInHistory, asking people to name a woman from history who deserved more recognition. And within days, thousands of people from Japan to Haiti to Saudi Arabia were nominating women of science and law, exploration, medicine, and art and activism, women who should have been household names.
Yeah, thousands, like not five,
No.
not a handful, of thousands. Which begs the question, why don't we know these names?
Exactly. And that's what Moss started asking in her book, Warrior Queens and Quiet Revolutionaries. She asked things like, what is history? Who controls the narrative?
Mm-hmm.
Who decides what matters and what doesn't? Why are women's achievements so easily overlooked or misattributed? Highly recommend you check it out. Very good book.
Just to note, those questions are like things we should ask ourselves in our own workplaces.
We should.
Who controls the narrative? What
Yes.
who decides what matters and what doesn't? Why are women's achievements so easily overlooked?
Yeah.
Let's remember these questions.
Good questions to just ask yourself on the daily.
And of course, one of the biggest reasons women are missing from history is something called the Matilda Effect. It's a routine airbrushing of women from history, or worse, the misattribution of their achievements to men.
Oh yeah, classic move. Classic. The term was actually coined by science historian Margaret Rossiter in the 1970s, but the problem does go back centuries. Take Lise Meitner, for example. She was a pioneer in nuclear physics and co-discovered nuclear fission, a discovery that literally changed the world.
Ooh, and did she get a Nobel Prize for it?
No.
Oh,
of course she didn't.
Of course.
Her male colleague, Otto Hahn, got the award in 1944 while she watched from the sidelines.
Not fair.
Nope.
And it gets worse. Lise was nominated 19 times for a Nobel Prize in chemistry between 1924 and 1948, and 29 times for a Nobel Prize in physics between 1937 and 1965. And guess what? She won 0.
Like so good.
How?
So good.
And she's not the only one. Let's do a quick rundown of some of the biggest cases of women being erased from history. So, number 1, Rosalind Franklin discovered the structure of DNA, like we mentioned. And we want to give the names to these people because this is important to name and remember these names. James Watson, though, and Francis Crick stole her research and got the Nobel Prize. Another key name to remember, Jocelyn Bell Burnell discovered pulsars, one of the most important astronomical discoveries of the 20th century, and her male advisor got the Nobel Prize.
Oh,
Shocker.
lovely.
Chien Shuyang Wu, a physicist whose work on nuclear physics helped prove an entire theory wrong and change the field forever. Her male colleague also got the Nobel Prize.
Like, these incredible scientists, I mean, these are very obviously Nobel Prize focus, which means like it's in science and in life-changing things. They are that's just a very small piece of the puzzle and a small piece of history that women have gone unrecognized or underrecognized, and I mean honestly just taken advantage of by women or men to win over their achievements and take it for themselves. So yeah, frickin' rude.
Right. And we need those textbooks desperately. Like, we need these updated textbooks and we need these updated history books, because the problem isn't just that women's contributions were ignored in the past, it's that they're still being ignored now.
Mm-hmm.
There are more male CEOs named John than there are female CEOs, period. Let that sink in. More male CEOs named John. More Johns out there than women total.
The old Johns.
Only 30% of elected officials globally are women. Only 30%.
Mm-hmm.
Less than 20% of major film studios are directed by women.
So let me get this straight. We know that women have been leading and innovating and discovering for thousands of years. I mean, look back at our matriarchy episode with Laurie Campbell. We know that women have been leading for a very, very long time. We know that their contributions were deliberately erased. And yet, even today, we're still pretending like men built everything. What?
Honestly, and if you ever wonder why girls don't get into STEM as much as boys, maybe it's because they never see themselves in the history, like,
right. Which is
expecting to be erased.
Yeah, it's so, I mean, and that's why it is so important that we start correcting this now, because we have an entire generation of kids who are growing up thinking that men invented everything, when in reality women have been inventing and leading since the beginning of time. I mean, that is starting to change. Like, if you ask, you know, a little kid who their doctor is, they'll say she is this person. Like, they'll kind of immediately go that way. But yeah.
Well, and the more we dig into history, the more we realize that women have literally always been there. They were just written out, and they didn't have that voice. They weren't the writers. They weren't the authors. They didn't have the funds to, you know, self-publish and all those other things. So they were there. They just were ignored.
And I think this is where, like, the conversation of, I mean, we're not going to get super into it, but like diversity, equity, and inclusion, where, like, if you're not given a chance, and if folks aren't given time to have their story being said, then, like, it just gets erased. Like, if women aren't at the table, if, you know, diverse folks are at the table, all that sort of things, then, like, nothing happens.
They were never in control of the narrative.
Right.
All right, folks, it's quiz time, because this information is very important. We're not going to let you forget it, and we want this to sink into your brain about how much history classes failed us all. So first question, who was the first Black woman elected to the Canadian Parliament? We have Kim Campbell, Agnes MacPhail, Jean Augustine, and Jean Mance.
Lots of Jeans.
Yeah.
And if you guessed one of the Jeans, Jean Augustine, congratulations. You win feminism for the day. Tell them what they've won, Skylar.
A lifetime of amazing realization about how much history has been erased and the overwhelming urge to correct it.
Okay, but seriously, here's a little bit about our gal. So Jean Augustine was a trailblazer. In 1993, she became, in 1993, not that long ago,
No,
in our
that was
lifetime.
in our lifetime.
Yeah.
Ooh.
She became the first Black woman elected to the House of Commons in Canada. But here's the part that should have been on our history tests. She's the reason Canada officially recognizes Black History Month.
And she introduced also the motion in Parliament in 1995. And thanks to her, Black History Month became a nationally recognized event. But tell me this, how many of us actually learned about her in school? I'd never heard of her name in my life.
I would say majority of the people listening, if not, I mean, 100% of the people doing this podcast right now didn't know of her.
And I also want to know, this makes me wonder, like, how often are history books updated?
Oh gosh.
Like, are they updated every 50 years? Because I feel like half of the information from the 90s is not included in history books. It was like from the 70s.
Oh my gosh.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
That's a thing that we should be looking into.
Yeah, like,
our children go to school.
Updated.
Yeah.
Okay. So next question. Who was the first female physician to practice in Canada? We have Laura Secord. Spoiler, she was a badass war hero, not a doctor. I'm thinking like Laura Secord, the ice cream lady.
Yeah, that is her. The ice cream and chocolate. It's named after her.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Emily Stowe, Clara Brett Martin, or Cecile Eustace Smith?
And the answer is Emily Stowe. Now, if you've been following along, you should know by now that women in history rarely got things handed to them, and Emily Stowe was no exception.
Oh, no, because why would a woman be allowed to study medicine in Canada in the 1800s? That would be too illogical. We wouldn't want women running around saving lives or anything.
Oh God,
It's not
no.
like they care. And,
No.
you know,
Worst kind of person to save someone's life.
might have some hysteria hit them, and who knows what will happen.
Their uterus will be migrating all over their body when they're trying to care for somebody. So in 1867, when Canadian medical schools straight up told her, nope, medicine is for men, she said, cool. I'm just going to go to the US then. She got her degree there and then came back to Canada as the first publicly practicing female doctor.
Oof.
Yeah.
And then because she was a legend, she didn't just stop at becoming a doctor. She was like, oh, so y'all are just making it impossible for women to study medicine? Fine, I'll fix it myself. So she co-founded the Ontario Medical College for Women, so other women wouldn't have to cross borders just to learn how to save lives.
But of course, again, women didn't contribute that much to history or to medicine or anything like that. Oh, really? Because I'm pretty sure Emily Stowe paved the way for thousands of women in medicine. Not sure, but tell me more about that random general from 1842.
I swear if a man held a sword once, he gets 7 pages in a history book.
Meanwhile, Emily Stowe, who founded an entire college so women could practice medicine, gets maybe one sentence in a textbook. Again, I mean, I didn't know who that was.
And yet here we are, still fighting for women in medicine to be taken seriously. Side note, women doctors today still face discrimination. A study found that patients are more likely to question diagnoses from female doctors compared to their male colleagues. What? Women in medicine also make on average 25% less than male counterparts.
Yeah, I believe that.
And female surgeons are less likely to be referred patients than male surgeons, even when they have the exact same experience level.
No.
Ugh.
So Emily Stowe then wasn't just a trailblazer. She was fighting a battle that still isn't over. And let's just take a moment to imagine how many more women could have shaped medicine earlier if they weren't constantly being told, sorry, no, the boy said no.
I think about that all the time and how much further ahead we'd be if a woman's ideas and contributions weren't blocked at every turn.
Yeah, which is exactly why we're doing this episode, because the more we talk about these women, the harder it is to erase them.
Mm-hmm. All right, Hollywood, listen up. If we're giving every white male historical figure a biopic, it's time to greenlight some movies about the women who actually built the modern world. And that's why today we're pitching 3 women who absolutely deserve their own blockbuster movie. First up, Ida B. Wells.
Ooh, this one's so good.
Yes.
So Ida B. Wells was an investigative journalist, civil rights activist, and one of the first women in America to own a newspaper.
So basically, she was exposing injustices and taking names before that was even a thing.
My kind of people, honestly. Let's be clear. Ida B. Wells wasn't just writing op-eds from the comfort of her home. She was out there risking her actual life to report on racial violence and lynchings in the U.S. She even took on the white-owned newspapers that were spreading false narratives about Black communities and called them out in print.
And because she was a boss, she didn't just report on injustice, she fought it. She co-founded the NAACP, which, by the way, they almost erased her from her own business, her own association.
Yeah.
She led one of the first anti-lynching campaigns in the U.S.
Incredible.
And she was one of the first Black women to run for public office in America.
And let me remind you, she was doing all of this in the late 1800s. Meanwhile, I can barely answer emails on time. And this woman was single-handedly holding corrupt politicians accountable.
So tell me why we have 3 Lincoln movies and not a single one about Ida B. Wells.
Right? I want a full biopic starring a powerhouse actresses with a killer script and Oscar-worthy cinematography. Hollywood, you can make this happen. Next up, the woman who literally got us to the moon.
Okay, let's talk about Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson. You might actually know them from the one movie that exists about these amazing women, which I love, called Hidden Figures.
So good.
But let's be real. These women deserve even more recognition than a movie.
Right. So for those who don't know, these 3 were the Black women mathematicians at NASA who did the calculations to put men on the moon. So Katherine Johnson, our first mathematician, literally so good at math that John Glenn said he wouldn't fly unless she personally checked the numbers. Imagine being so brilliant that an astronaut is like, yeah, I don't trust the computers. Go get Katherine.
Amazing.
Yeah. The second is Dorothy Vaughan, a literal coding genius who taught herself and her team how to program NASA's first computers. And then Mary Jackson became NASA's first Black female engineer by petitioning a judge to let her to take engineering classes in an all-white school.
Such a good movie. Highly recommend.
Yeah.
And by the way, NASA barely credited them until decades later for any of this.
Yes, of course they didn't. We know this groundbreaking work, and of course women weren't involved. Yes.
Right. And tell me why Apollo 13 has like 5 different movies and these women got one film in the last, like, I don't know, it's probably 5 years old.
Yeah, I don't even know. But yes, Hollywood definitely needs to do better.
Yes.
Finally, let's look at Hedy Lamarr.
Hedy Lamarr is one of my favorite historical figures because this woman was the definition of multitasking. And boy, do I love myself some multitasking.
She loves a multitasker, folks.
On one hand, she was glamorous. She was a world famous actress in the 1940s.
Yeah. And then on the other hand, she co-invented the technology that led to Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS.
Oh. Yeah, so while men in Hollywood were making black and white war movies, she was developing early frequency hopping technology that's now used in modern communications. Like, how would we survive without GPS?
Oh my gosh, I know.
I think back to the days of maps, and I'm like, I would literally like die. I could not imagine trying to drive.
No, anywhere to go anywhere in this city. I live in this city, and I have to use maps half the time. Yeah, like my Google Maps. The technology behind iPhones and AirPods and your car's GPS, as I just said, was developed by a 1940s actress. We would not be here without Hedy Lamarr.
And somehow we don't talk about this. Hedy Lamarr patented her invention in 1942, but the U.S. military ignored it for years. It wasn't until decades later that scientists realized her technology was brilliant and essential for secure communications. And she died without ever making a cent from her invention because, of course, she did.
So let's recap. A woman invented the foundation of modern wireless communication, and she got zero credit for it in her lifetime. Classic. But sure, let's keep making movies about men inventing weapons. You said it says the theme here.
Yes. Yeah. I would like a high-budget action-packed biopic about Hedy Lamarr immediately, please.
Yes.
Hollywood, call us. We have the notes.
We have the notes. We have the receipts, as we said. All right, so we've pitched the 3 biopics that need to happen. I don't know who's going to make them. Our work here is done.
But if we don't see at least one of these movies announced in the next 5 years, I'm starting my own company, and I'm said that more than once. So I guess you're gonna have to hold me to it. Erasure Studios, just think of it now, where we make the feminist movies Hollywood refuses to find.
Honestly, I would invest. If I had the funds to invest, I would invest. We'd be like the new Reese Witherspoon thing. She like buys all the rights to a bunch of books and then has like this huge production company and keeps making things.
You know what?
She's like a billionaire now.
Honestly, like totally. But this is what I'm thinking of, like, because I've been, Christmas was recently. I'm thinking about all the movies I've watched lately, and like every single documentary is about a woman getting killed lately. Or like, have you seen Apple Cider Vinegar?
Yes.
Or like a woman doing something like atrocious.
Yeah.
Or like models or women getting killed. Like, they're so tragic. They spend so much time on these tragedies that happen to women, but like nothing about the positive. Like, I don't see everything's just so negative. I find
that's very true. That's very true. I've watched Apple Cider Vinegar, like all the like Gabby Petito and like all of
like
those.
Everything's about like who killed this and she killed. Like, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many stories to tell that just aren't told, that are like, there could be a lot more uplifting, inspiring.
Exactly. And for people to look up to.
Yeah. But for real, the fact that these women's stories aren't widely known is exactly why we need to keep talking about them, because the more we highlight the work, the harder it is to erase them. Okay, so we spent the last 30 minutes calling out history's failures, getting mad about Hollywood, and exposing how women's achievements have been erased. And listen, we love a good rant, because really that's what this episode's all about. But you know what we love even more? Guess. Taking action. It's all about the action.
Yes. So, because being mad is apparently just the first step, the real power move is making sure that these stories don't get buried. And the good news, we can all do something starting right now as you listen to this episode.
Yeah. So step 1 is we need to read about, Google about women's stories. Who invented this? Like, we gave a bunch of names today. Look into that. Educate yourself and others, because these history books aren't doing the right job. we need to do this research for ourselves.
Right. That means like actively seeking out stories about women that history has erased. If you need a reading list, we've got you covered. We have a few that we will recommend. One is Invisible Women by Caroline Criado Perez, who we've referenced and have recommended this book multiple times.
Mhm.
But if you want the hard facts on how society literally wasn't designed for women and has erased women from the equation, listen or read that one or
Oh,
listen
yeah.
to it or
It's
however you
amazing.
consume books. The other one is The Women Who Made History by Rosalind Miles, because we need more than just the 5 same names every Women's History Month.
Yes.
So again, she has a whole list of women and goes through and covers all of them in this wonderful book.
Honestly, I read Invisible Women last